Thank you. I am such a huge fan of this show, which is why they asked me to come. I've seen every workshop they did, and I was lucky enough to go to Chicago to see it, and then I saw it on Broadway, and I just love it so much, and I'm thrilled to be here. And I'd like to introduce this incredibly wonderful panel. First, I'm going to start in the back with Mr. Dan Wallace, who wrote the novel. And you can't get anywhere without producers, and here they are, Dan Jinks and Bruce Cohen. And the brilliant man who wrote the music and the lyrics, Mr. Andrew Lippa. And John August, who wrote the movie and this musical, the book of the musical. Okay, and this beauty, the director and the choreographer, Miss Susan Stroman. And the lovely, amazing, gorgeous Mr. Bobby Steggert. And that stunner right there, Miss Kate Baldwin. So I have some questions. We're going to go around and ask them some questions, and then we're going to have a little performance, and we'll go back to some questions, and then you'll be able to ask some questions as well. I'm going to start with Mr. Dan Wallace tonight. The question is, what led you to write Big Fish?
Well, I had a somewhat contentious relationship with my dad. I love Greek myth, and the two came together, sort of like peanut butter and jelly. I mean, I can't believe nobody's ever done it before. I had a son who's about two years old when I started working on it, and I could only write while he napped. And so if you look at the book now, the chapters are anywhere from a paragraph long to a page and a half long, and those like rings in a tree. You have a historical record of how long my son napped on those days. But I do think it was having a son on. My son determined the structure of the book, and my father determined the theme of the book. So it was like a bookend.
Fabulous. Oh my God, that's such a sweet story.
Yeah,
I love
it
the
happens.
rings.
It's also true.
Oh. Well, we have to talk to our producers a little bit. I mean, both of you have had incredible success in Hollywood. Was this the first time working in theater for both of you?
You know, I actually started out working in the theater when I was a young pup just out of NYU. I did a whole bunch of jobs that you do when you're a young pup, which is when I first met our general manager, who's there in the front row, Wendy Orshan. I was like a producer's assistant, a production assistant, a theater ad guy, and a lot of things like that. And I've always wanted to do a Broadway show. I will tell you, the idea to turn this story into a Broadway show, though, started with John August. Right before the movie came out, we were all talking. He goes, "What do you think about turning this into a musical?" And I said, "I think it's a fantastic idea." And that was almost exactly 10 years ago.
Wow. And Mr. Cohen?
This was the first theater project I'd ever worked on. I grew up in Washington, D.C. and spent a lot of time in New York, so I had been attending and loving theater since I was a little kid. This is the first theatrical experience.
And what do you think?
And not the last.
Good.
For sure.
That's what we want to hear. Yeah. That's what we want to hear. Andrew, how were you brought on board to all this? How did this happen?
Well, in 2004, I was with my husband, who's here. Hi, David. At a birthday party, and I was talking to a very attractive young chorus boy, and he said, "Stop talking to the chorus boy, come meet Bruce Cohen." It was a good meet. And Bruce came over to brunch to our apartment. We said, "What are you doing tomorrow? You want to come over for brunch?" And he said, "Yes." And I found that suspect. And but he came, and we talked, and the next day he went back to Los Angeles, where he then lived a lot of the time. And I said to David, I said, "You remember Big Fish? Bruce produced that movie. He was a co-producer of that movie, and I loved that movie. I think that movie would make a terrific musical. I'm going to call Bruce Cohen." This is how the conversations with David go, by the way. I don't let him say anything. I just talk through things. And I said, "I'm going to call Bruce Cohen and ask him if they want to turn it into a musical." And so I did. And Bruce said, in fact, we've been talking about it as a musical, and in fact, you're on our list, at the top of our list of people we wanted to speak to about turning it into a musical. Why don't you get on the phone with John August? And a month later, I was in Los Angeles. John picked me up at the airport. We drove out to a place that we rented for a few days where we could be isolated, and we wrote the first 2 scenes and songs of the musical, took them back to LA, played them for Dan and Bruce. They didn't say a word. They looked at each other, they looked at us, and they said, this is good, let's make a musical. Let's do it.
That's
And that was
great.
it. That was 9 years ago.
Wow. That's how long it takes.
Yeah.
Like 9 years. John, what was it about Dan's book that intrigued you to
Well,
write this?
I first got Daniel's book before it was published, so it just arrived on my doorstep as a manuscript, which is like a big box of pages. And I had 12 hours to decide whether I wanted to attach myself as a screenwriter to this book. This property was going to go out to the studios, and I could attach myself as
you
a
had
guest.
how long to
12 hours
do this?
to make this decision. Like, do I want to decide to do this project? And so I remember sitting, like, I plopped it down on my little IKEA table, and I started flipping pages, like, yeah. I was like, oh, this is actually really good. And as I was turning pages, I was adding a French wife, and I was moving stuff around, and I was like, what I loved about Daniel's book is that I had lost my own father to cancer a few years before then, and I would never have written an autobiographical story about that. There was a chance to use what I knew about what it was like to have that situation and not have it be strictly autobiographical. That said, I completely plugged myself into the story. So Edward Bloom is my dad's age, and I'm Will's age. I was 28 when I started this whole project. And so the time differences could be right. So like when we went back in time, all those time things would be simple. I made Will a journalist because I was a journalism major. In Daniel's book, Will is the narrator, but he's not really a character who does anything by himself. And so I just put myself there. And I was already seeing all these, I knew there were Greek myths. I didn't know sort of how they all fit together, but I knew that things would have to be combined in a way to make it make sense as a movie. So things like the circus was a way of doing the 12 labors of Hercules, but putting them all together under one big tent. So the circus was an invention. And literally in the 12 hours I had to decide, like, I think I'm gonna do this, I had sort of built out all these things and knew that I wanted to make this movie and ultimately this musical.
Wow, 12 hours.
12
ladies
hours.
and gentlemen,
Yeah.
12 hours. How about that?
Yeah.
Wow. Miss Stroman, what drew you to this musical? What drew you in?
Well, I
honey?
got a call from Dan Jinks, and I knew, of course, of Dan and Bruce because of the wonderful movies they produced, like American Beauty and Milk and Big Fish. But when he said that he was thinking about turning Big Fish into a musical, I was attracted to it right away because I had loved the movie when I saw it, and I could relate to the movie. My father told Big Fish stories. And I think for all of us in the theater, if you create for the theater or just go to the theater, you love it because someone told you Big Fish stories in your lifetime. And so right away I was attracted to the idea of it. And I also thought it was unique because it would have big fantastical moments, but also these beautiful, profound and moving moments between a father and a son and a wife. And a lot of musicals don't have that. They either have one or the other. So I was really attracted to it right away because of those elements. And it had great opportunity for dance, too, because of the fantasy moments. And so when he called me, I said, yes, I will take that meeting.
Oh,
Can I just
thank God.
interject that the meeting was in Susan Stroman's studio, and Andrew and John basically did the entire show for her. They played every role, and it was just it was the five of us that were there for this, and we were so nervous because we really wanted Susan Stroman to direct the show. And when we were all done, there was a silence for a moment, and then Susan Stroman started giving a couple of notes, and we all were like, wait a second, does this mean she's saying yes? Is she actually doing it? And immediately you did, and we were beyond thrilled. We walked off to the street, and we just sort of cheered, and
Thank God.
thank God is right.
Will is the son, played by the incredible Bobby Steggert. He's complicated and conflicted, this young man. And how do you balance his feelings for his father every night?
Oh, God. I mean, that was a real journey for all of us. The big dramaturgical question mark for us in Chicago was, how do we give Will a really strong point of view? And they did the most amazing work over the summer to give Will a perspective that the audience could really key into. And then I think what Norbert and I did in our process from Chicago to here is simply to always play the love. So when there's frustration, when there's anger, when there's exasperation, it's all because of the deep love that we have for each other. It was a great lesson as an actor in always choosing the positive, because Will is at his wit's end, but he just has to keep giving Edward another chance. And he does all the way until the end. And it's been a hard but a really rewarding process to learn that about the character. And because Norbert is such a present and generous actor, even when the character is angry, Bobby is so kind of delighted by him, and I think that combination kind of plays into a much more real and relatable relationship, and I really respect him, and I hope that comes across. And so the balance is hard, but it's been worth it.
I think that's a great thing to approach every role with, trying to find the positive in it. You know,
Yeah.
it's a great way to do whatever you're doing.
I think, I'm sure I will take that lesson with me for sure.
I think we all
Yeah,
should.
yeah.
Miss Baldwin, how much do we love this gal? This story goes back and forth in time, and you play both the younger and the older. How does that come together and affect you every night as this?
I love to do it. It's a great gift to be able to play multiple ages in a 2.5-hour time period. I guess the last 3 shows that I've done, I've been able to take in the span of a person's life, and it's exhausting, but it's so rewarding because you get to remember what it was like to be 17 and to want a life experience, and you know, so you think about, what I think about are, you know, where she is mentally and where she is physically. So the things I work on is a point of view. You know, at the circus, she's auditioning and she thinks that this is gonna, you know, launch her into the world and give her the adventure that she's always wanted. And what does a person like that how does that person stand? How does that person move? And she leads with her heart, you know, that kind of thing. And then, you know, later on in college, she has had some life experience, and she's met this weirdo, Don Price. And the fantasy boy from the circus comes back to her, and so she's leading with her hip a little bit because, you know, because she's flirting with him. Yeah, now, and you're gonna see all my secrets now. I'm a secret actor plumbing. That's what I call it. And then, you know, later on, and then we get to see her later in her life, and that's when I, as an actress, sort of project into the future about what you know, what you're facing at the end of your lifelong love's life, and how to mend the relationship between these 2 men that you love, your son and your husband. And physically, I just give in to everything that hurts. I just give in to my back. I just give in to my feet, because it all kind of hurts a lot when you do this 8 times a week. So yeah, it's a total thrill to play so many ages of a woman's life. It's a huge gift. I love it.
And you do it so beautifully.
Thank you.
I think it's very unusually to find this character who is between these 2 men who you really truly love both of them.
Yes.
I mean, that's a very beautiful thing to watch. You don't get to see that very often.
She's equally torn.
It's
equally
gorgeous.
torn.
You do such a beautiful job.
Yeah, it hurts her that she can't get them
Yeah.
together. Yeah, yeah.
It's gorgeous. I think we're going to have a little song now. Mr. Lippa, would you take us into this?
Sure. So this song comes relatively early in the show, and it is sung by the character of Will Bloom, played by Bobby Steggert. And the song that was in the show in Chicago was a duet for Bobby and for Norbert's character, Edward Bloom. And it was rather dark and negative, and it was about all what they didn't get from each other, and they were angry at each other the whole way through the song, and we thought it was like, you know, oh, it's deep and angst, and the audience was like, no. Because they didn't really want to invest in this negativity. They wanted to invest in something else. And we racked our brains, and in the final week in Chicago, while the actors were doing the show that was at that point frozen for a moment, John and I were working, and we had a thought. John gave me a sentence that sparked a thought, and I went and I wrote the first third of this song, and we met in this second basement in the theater in Chicago, a windowless, airless room, which is strangely where I feel most comfortable. And I was so scared. I thought I figured the song out, but I was terrified that he would think I hadn't. And if he thinks that, then this song isn't in the show. That's the nature of our collaboration. And I take every scene he writes and use it. I don't argue, but he just will say. So
Yeah.
I just wanted the opportunity to express my feelings tonight about this. So I played in the first part of this song, and then I said, and that's where I've stopped. And there was a pause, and he was sitting this close to me on the piano bench, and he leaned forward and hugged me. And I burst out crying. And we sat there, and he started crying, and I was like, oh, this is so gay. And here's the song.
Stranger, I'm feeling stranger than I've ever felt before, and so much more different, like something old has joined with something new, but still feels true. I'm passing through a rite that every parent does. I'm walking on some shared familiar ground, yet every step I take is not a step that was. And I found I like the sound of stranger. A child I've yet to meet becomes my everything, my song to sing. Father, and suddenly the weight of it is real. What do I feel? I feel connected in a way I've never known. A line from dad to me to newborn son. So from today, I'll never make a choice alone. One for all for one. And when he's born, I'll teach him how to use his common sense. He'll listen and he'll learn and he'll excel. I'll tell my son that life is lived in clear and present tense, not only in the stories we can tell. My father told me stories I could never comprehend. In every tale he'd claim to be the hero. I've tried to understand him, but I wonder if I can. Because after almost 30 years, I still don't know the man. I wish I knew the man, but he's a stranger. My father is a stranger I know very well. A puzzling shell, hopeful. What's on its way may help us both to grow. But I don't know when I'll understand what made him wild. I don't know why he has the urge to fly. I wanna face him like a man and not a child. So I'll try, I'll really try. And in time, my boy is sure to see brighter days for Dad and me. We can do things better than before. So that strangers we will be no more.
The wonderful thing about working with an actor and a singer like Bobby is that at the end, the song went do da 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 da, and then the middle part da 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 da. And when we were working in the rehearsal room, Bobby's got a wonderful high voice, and so we right in the rehearsal room, and he was having a little bit of not trouble, but I could feel that he wasn't really flying. So I was like, no, what if I did da 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 da, and then keep going da 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 da. I wanna face him, and we were like, yes. And so the melody changes. We've heard it enough times, and now it's just got a little variation, and then he gets to soar, and it's just incredible when that happens. So that's what that is.
I've never had a composer write a song with me in mind ever, and so
Madness.
It was the biggest gift. This is one of the top 5 gifts of my entire career to have that song written. It changed my entire experience of the show. It really did. So thank you.
And it was such a gift for all of us to hear you sing it too. Just beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm going to go back to Mr. Wallace for a second. Was there a specific reason to put your story in the South and specifically Alabama?
Oh yeah, very good reason. Because I'd never been anywhere else, pretty much. I've lived in the South all my life, either in Alabama or North Carolina. So it's all I knew. I mean, the idea of research just puts me to sleep. I mean, why would I write a story that takes place in Seattle, for instance? If I wrote a science fiction novel, it would take place in southern Mars, where everybody's really polite and things happen slowly. Yeah, I have no choice. You just write what you know. In that respect, there's no reason to go anywhere else.
Love it. Were there witches where you grew up? I have to ask
Say that one more time.
Were there witches where you grew up? Real witches?
Well, it's a well-known fact that every southern town.
I love that.
No, my mom was. The stories you heard about her are not true. She's very
Dan and Bruce, how did Dan's book get to? How did you all find out about the book?
It was completely John August. John and I had lunch one day, and he was asking what was going on with us, and he said that he had written a screenplay for Sony and didn't have a producer on it. I'll tell you the most interesting part of that backstory is John was telling you how he had to decide in a certain amount of time to purchase this, whether he wanted to be the screenwriter attached to the book or not. But how it got sold to Sony was because John had become Sony's #1 writer. He was saving their butts on a lot of movies. They would bring him in when they were about to shoot something and it wasn't working. They would call John, and he was doing that movie after movie after movie. So
Can you explain exactly what that means? Because they may not understand that.
Well, sometimes when you're about to shoot a movie and the script just isn't there yet, the original screenwriter just hit a wall and wasn't accomplishing what needed to be accomplished, they'll bring in a superstar like John who will do a draft of the script, sometimes in a week or two and make it so it's either funnier, smarter, so it makes sense more, et cetera. He can speak to this much more articulately since he's done this a lot. Well, he was doing this on a lot of different movies at Sony, and so they kind of owed him a favor. So they brought him this book, which was not an obvious movie. It's a beautiful story, but it wasn't one of those books that screams out major motion picture. And I think they really bought it just because they kind of owed John a favor. Then he wrote a script that was so beautiful that then it was able to have a life.
Beautiful. I'm going to go to Andrew. How many songs did you actually write for the show? I mean, all together, and tell us a little bit about that process.
I find that process is similar. It's often similar from show to show. It's usually the number of songs in the show times 2. And so there are like 18 titles in the show. So you guys do the math. Yeah. It's 39. No. Oh no. Amy, what is it? 36. And there are a bunch of songs. What happens sometimes is we'll do like a Frankenstein song where we'll take. John will remember 7 years later. It's incredible, actually. He'd be like, "Hey, you remember that thing you wrote for Sandra and it went blah 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 blah?" And really, one time he did that, and I was like, "Nope." No. And then I'd have to go back to my computer and look at the dates and really try to unearth this thing. There's actually a thing in the show. The bridge. In Sandra's song, in Act 1, it's called Two Men, and that spot was just really hard to get right, and I wrote I wrote a really good song that just didn't work, and then I wrote a really bad song, and then I wrote another bad song, and then this thing that's in the show now existed like 5 years ago, and Stroh didn't know it, and so we kind of pulled bits and bobs together, and then
we said, "Hey, we wrote your new song.
Look at this." Yeah, we pretended it was new. That's right, we did. Kind of lied, and sorry, and then it turned out to be. Everybody got that thing that happens when you bring a new thing into the room and it works. Everybody was excited about it. So that any number of songs go away, and usually there's only one or two really good ones in the lot of the ones that you cut. So then I put them in my club act.
Yeah. Well,
I was wondering where those songs went to after.
Well, it's worth pointing out though, like the first two songs we wrote, which were like, oh, this is Big Fish, so we know what it is. It's called God's Honest Truth, which is the opening number, which we cut after Chicago, and This River Between Us, which was the big fight, angry song, which is a beautiful song, but just was the wrong song for the show. So in most cases, it wasn't that they were bad songs; they just didn't do the job we needed them to do in the show at that place, at that moment, in that time, or they were duplicating energy from some other part of the show.
Of the I think it is 18 titles, like full song titles. Yeah. 5 of them were written since Chicago ended. Yeah. So we did we reconstructed a lot of the first act, and I wrote 5 songs in May, June to July, and then that thing in September actually while we were in performance. That's the job. That's the job. That's what we do. We write script and music and lyrics, and so in the clinch, you have this opportunity to get your show right, and the hope is that the show is going to live a long time, so it will be done in lots of places, in lots of ways, in lots of languages, and we want the version of the show, obviously to be as good as it can be.
Well, we want to see it over and over again, I'll tell you that much. John, it took you 12 hours to write the movie.
To read the book and figure out, to decide to do it.
How long, tell us a little bit about the experience of
I didn't write the movie in 12 hours, Lord.
What I'm saying.
Sorry, wow.
I didn't mean that.
I'd be really impressed.
But how long did it take you to write the musical version? I mean, talk about that a little bit.
So I think there's this perception that like I go off and like write a whole thing and I leave these little holes for Andrew to fill with songs, and that wasn't our process at all. So we were always in the room together figuring out like, well, what is this next thing? And so we wanted to make sure that it always felt like everything that was spoken or sung came from the same brain. So doing the big mind meld at the start was tough, but it was a really good process. Like one of our first decisions, I'm usually Spock in this, he's usually Kirk. One of the first.
I love him for that, actually.
He's actually Edward Bloom, and I'm actually Will. That's
true.
One of the crucial things we figured out early on is that as we were playing the show for ourselves and for Dan and Bruce, we were naturally those characters. And he is this sort of bigger than life person, and I'm a little bit more focused. And Andrew, we have to get this done. We have to get this stuff, finished. And so we would work through scenes and songs at the same time and make sure it all made sense. And he had veto power over anything I wrote and vice versa. And we would try to make sure it felt like the right thing. And we sort of just gradually built the show, act by act, scene by scene, moment by moment. And we would play for Dan and Bruce whatever stuff we'd done. So they were our audience for the first 5 years, was just Dan and Bruce. And until we had sort of a whole show that we could show to Susan Stroman, it was just us.
And how does this veto thing work? I mean, was that difficult?
It's being very supportive and but very, very honest. And we had to learn how to be honest.
Let's be completely clear. She has the ultimate.
Yeah.
That's the boss. I mean,
boss lady.
Seriously, in a most wonderful way. It's like we had a great time making the show, and we did this thing where we were very honest with each other. But we have this extraordinarily gifted woman on the stage with us who saw the potential in what we had done and said, "Great, now let me do it. Give it to me." But she does it in such a wonderful way. Doesn't come out that way. But really, it's her vision on the stage that helps us figure out the final bits and the nuance of it all. So maybe, I don't know, you're in charge here, but you want to speak about that?
That segues right into Chicago. You were in Chicago for 5 weeks, was it?
Yes, 5 weeks.
What happened in Chicago, and how did that influence you?
I think the last part of the process when you're creating a new musical, of course, is the audience. And you can feel the breath of an audience if something's not quite working. Andrew wrote fantastic opening number, and I love that number so much. It was called The God's Honest Truth, and for some reason it wasn't kicking the show off correctly, and you could feel it in the audience. And both Andrew and John tried to tweak that particular number to see if we could save that number. And I thought it could be saved because the number was so darn good. But it just didn't kick off the show right. So then coming back, we knew in Chicago we had to write another song. But time was running out, and it had to be, I was talking costumes, lighting, projection. To change one thing in a musical, it involves 5 departments. So it's a real ordeal to make changes, but you do them. But that was too big of a change for us to do. And I think, too, Andrew, you felt you really needed a little more time than just, give me a number by tomorrow. So we let it sit in Chicago, but knowing full well that we would change it. And I think that's, and I think John said, too, the numbers were never, Andrew's an incredible writer. It was just sometimes you just always need them to push the plot forward, and we could feel that, But it is quite a thing because I always would say to both of you how much I love this particular moment, but it's just not working. But great diplomacy is needed because, of course, they're incredible artists. But I need to get that show going, so I need more out of them. So it is. But the collaboration was very strong. When they first came to me with that first draft of the musical, guys, I just said that let's do a reading and let's work on this piece of what you've given me to the reading, and also that was helping me understand if we could even collaborate. And of course, it was wonderful.
Well, that's the nature of this collaboration has always been. Earlier, Stroh said we wrote a new song, and the truth is, I wrote it, but John and I conceived the scene, and I don't write the scene. John writes the scene, but Stroh gives us incredible amount of input as we're doing it, before we're doing it, once we've done it, and so there is this wonderful feeling among us, and there was on this show all the way through, which is. We wrote a song, we wrote a scene, we staged a number. We took ownership of each other's work in that way. Frankly, I haven't had that on a show before, and I think that helped get this show to a deeper place. That opening number is now called Be the Hero. And John and I were on the phone. One of these things was, I had a meeting with Stroh the next day, and I was supposed to have an opening number. And I just didn't know what it was. And I had written this thing about telling stories, right? What was it called? I don't remember. It was about to tell the perfect tale.
Tell the perfect
it was about the
tale.
perfect tale, and it just wasn't very good. And all of a sudden, I said on the phone to John. John lives in L.A. and I was in New York. I said, "It's just not good. And who gives a crap about a guy telling tales? And it's not about that. It's who cares what he thinks? He's got to do something like with his kid. And I start getting really petulant like that. Yeah. And just imagine 15 years of living with that. And so John was only 9 years of not living with that. And John said, "Okay, Andrew," like my therapist. "Okay, Andrew. What do you think we should, let's talk about what else we might do here." Yeah. And I said, okay. And John all of a sudden, I said, well, what is it? What does he want to say to his kid? And John said, well, and I wrote all of this down. He said, don't tell the story, be in the story. Be the person who writes your own story. Be the hero of your story. And a bunch of other stuff. And I said, okay, goodbye. And I sat down and I wrote, be the hero of your story if you can. Be the champion in the fight, not just the man. And I wrote the whole chorus right in 1 2-minute creative vomit. And the thing that Stroh was talking about also is that when something doesn't feel right, it's because we've got to do character, story, some visual idea, something energy, something, my mother would call it tam, the feel of something for the Jews here. And any of that can go wrong. And this thing suddenly all locked in and felt right. And I called John back and I played it and he got excited and he said, okay, go down that road, you can do it, go down that road. It was like a coach, in a match or something, and I was like, yes, sir, yes, and hang up, second verse, you know, and I stayed up all night, and then I stayed up all night, and then. And then he woke up at 6 the next morning, LA time. I called him at 9. We went through all the bits and the scenes and pieced it together. And at 11:30, I was at her door, and I played her the opening number that you see on the stage at the Neil Simon. And the great thing about that collaboration is that the little gem that came out of the Chicago rethink was this thing called the Alabama Stomp. And we had Stroh had this idea, and we talked about like what this could be, and we did a smaller version of it. And then once we written this big number, we found a way. Stroh, you know, because she's so thinks visually, she's like, but we got to include the fish, and there were no fish in the opening number as would be the hero. And I'm like, what do you want fish from? You know, what do you need fish? And she was like, fish. We got to have fish. And all of a sudden, this thing happened, and boy, are there fish. And the dancing, the number. I just think it's one of the greatest things that she's ever done, and it's so exciting, and it draws the audience into this character and into the relationship between him and his son. And it took all that thinking and all of that, wrestling to the ground to get it right. And we're so, we're lucky that we got there.
That's what's so exciting about creating a new musical too, how it happens. And now there's a dance called the Alabama Stomp that's never existed before.
Yeah.
And yes, Andrew brought this song over to me, and there were no fish anywhere, and it was like, the show's called Big Fish. I gotta have a fish. There's gotta be fish. I know the song is great, but where are the fish?
Yes.
So then the idea came of that Edward Bloom would say that if you stomped on the edge of the pier or on the wharf, if you stomped hard enough, the fish would fly out of the river and come to you. So he would do a dance called the Alabama Stomp. So the number culminates into him, to Edward Bloom and his son, teaching his son the Alabama Stomp, and all of a sudden fish start flying out of the oyster pit. So I got it all.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Bobby, you have an amazing emotional journey every night in this show. What's that like every night to do that, and what's it like to go home afterwards?
That's a really good question. I guess I'll answer it honestly. It's been a very hard year for me. They say that that your body doesn't recognize the difference between what you feel in your life and what you feel as an actor, and I believe that for me. I'm not the kind of actor who can separate. My mechanism is all sort of one mechanism. So the headspace I'm in 8 times a week is sort of the headspace that bleeds into my life. And it's worth it because I believe in the story, and it's worth it because I believe in what the show is about. But it has its cost. And on Sunday nights I'm pretty spent. I don't have much emotional energy, to be quite honest. The flip side of the coin is simply that the themes of the show, love, bravery, commitment, passion, compassion, I try to take those lessons with me too, to sort of balance it out a bit. I mean, the message is worth the cost for me.
Well, it's such a beautiful ending of the show. You can at least leave with that hope. You know?
You can leave with
the hope.
The idea of the importance of legacy, the importance of someone living on and being able to live on in things other than their physical self, and that is an inspiring thought to take with you too.
It is beautiful. Kate, you were in a Susan Stroman musical. What did you think about the dancing? Tell us about the dance. What were you thinking about?
Again.
You know how she just said, and I got it all? She wants it all. I remember, saying, but it's really hard to, do that and then do this and then do, and she goes, I know, and I want it all. And you want to give it to her because she's Susan Stroman, and your 12-year-old self is going, oh my God, I'm in a Susan Stroman show. I'm doing a specialty dance in a Susan Stroman show. Let's see. My first involvement with the show was 2 years ago. We did a workshop table read in which there was no dancing. And I fell in love with the story then. I fell in love with the music then. I fell in love with Sandra then. And then we did, about a year or 8 months later, we did a full, sort of laboratory version where it was actually, we were up on our feet, and it was staged and with costumes and props and fish and dancing. And that's when I went, whoa, this is really serious. So that when she's really serious about making me jump up and down. And so, actually, Laura Seibert, who's in our cast, I had just done a show with her sister. And so Laura, dances alongside me in a number called Little Lamb from Alabama, and it's a fun little clogger number. And her Texas sister came to see the show, and she goes, "I don't think I've ever seen Kate Baldwin move that fast," which is true. I make a point of not moving so fast. But anyway, yeah, I knew that Broadway was coming, so I got my butt in gear. Yeah, I prepared.
Well,
It's hard.
But Little Lamb from Alabama, you are between two professional dancers, and you were
Goddesses
like
of dance.
amazing.
I know, these are the
It's
girls who backed
amazing.
up Hugh Jackman on his
Yes.
his show. So yes, I had a little bit of an uphill climb, but
I was
I'm so glad it
impressed.
came back. And acting the dance really helps me get in the right headspace of it. I remember being 17 and being on stage and being like, this is it, and that's kind of where I go every night, and I just have fun, and I have a ponytail, and
Yeah, exactly.
half my acting comes from my hair, so it's good too.
Well, this is the perfect time to hear Kate sing one of my favorite songs in the show, "I Don't Need a Roof."
Acting the dance, by the way, sounds like a class you'd take here at the 92nd Street.
It does, doesn't it?
This song is sung by Sandra in the second act after Edward has a drug-induced hallucination where he believes his son is holding him on trial for crimes of being a bad father. And when he wakes up from his terrible dream, there's a thunderstorm going on, and his wife cradles him. And as sometimes happens in very, very emotional moments in a marriage, you just collapse where you are, and they fall on the floor, and she sings this.
In your face, I see a lifetime. In this place, I feel that ease. Wallpaper peeling, paint wearing thin. Here's where I end and begin. I don't need a roof to say I'm covered. I don't need a roof to know I'm home. There could be a single shingle dangling overhead. I don't need a roof to make my bed. Close your eyes, I'm still beside you. No goodbyes needed today. Hear what the rain says, know what it knows. After the rain, something grows. I don't need a roof to say I love you. I don't need a roof to call you mine. I don't need adventure in some faraway frontier. I don't need a
is true and absolute. I don't need a legal deed to help me play my part. I don't need a roof to hold my heart. Stay with me. Stay with me.
You know what's amazing about, okay, I'm a wreck now, I can't even talk, about Kate and Bobby and Norbert is that they are incredible singers, but they're such amazing actors, and you really feel that. It's not just somebody singing a song. All of you are extraordinary, and that doesn't always happen, and you have all three of these amazing people in your cast. It's a real privilege to hear you sing. I can't even talk anymore.
My voice teacher in college always said, you can sing or you can cry. You can't do both.
Yeah.
So that's why I only cried the very end, the very last bit.
And it
you know,
works.
just the very end.
It
yeah.
works.
Unless you're Bernadette Peters, you can't do both. She can. She can do both. Yeah.
It's true, she can.
I can.
I'm going to go back to Mr. Wallace again.
Yeah.
What was it like to relinquish your baby, your book, to John and to everyone here? What was that like? Were you afraid, or was anything?
I was
what did
so
you think?
scared.
What?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't at all. You know, when Dan said, you look at the book, it doesn't really read like a movie. It doesn't really read like a musical. The whole idea of either continues to be preposterous to me. I mean, it's just so unbelievable that they could take this little book, 185-page book, doesn't have a plot, has one character pretty much, and the father is the only real character. Everybody else just sort of pops in and out, and create this incredibly moving arc. It's a relationship between a father and a son, and a man and his wife. That's art. And when I met John, I realized that he was an artist. And I know people, novelists, have horror stories about this experience, but I have been so fortunate and lucky, really top to bottom, to be associated with these people. I mean, they have taken this and adopted it and made it something that I could never have conceived of. But now that they've done it, I think there's a lot more to be done. There's a children's show, I think, in here, a puppet show. There's the restaurant chain. I think there's so much
The water
more.
ballet.
Water ballet. There's no stopping it now, John. Get to work.
Yeah.
Bruce, I want to ask you, when did you decide to really start this process to make this into the musical?
Well, as Dan had said, John had the idea and floated it to the two of us right as the movie was coming out, which will actually be 10 years this coming month. And we both thought that it was a really exciting idea. One of the things that really grabbed me when I thought about the musical version is that the whole theme, or one of the whole themes of Big Fish is fantasy and reality, and which is which. And in a film, just by the nature of the medium, when you're getting ready to shoot the scene, you kind of have to decide where the scene is on the spectrum of fantasy and reality. And so there was, in some sense, less left to the audience's imagination in a film version. In addition to the fact that in the film, both Edward Bloom and Sandra were played by two different actors because the age range was so long, and it's along the same lines. In a film, you have to do a more realistic job of creating a character. So one actor playing from 12 to death is really hard. But so those were the two immediate advantages of the theatrical version that got us all very excited, was that by having one Edward Bloom and one Will Bloom and one Sandra Bloom, the audience would really be able to connect to those characters, and the whole question of what's real and what isn't, and what's in Edward Bloom's imagination and what isn't, would be much more left to the audience to really decide as they were going through, and then be surprised at the end.
Can I just add to that?
Please.
Bruce mentioned that thing about the choosing to have Edward Bloom be played by one guy. That was a decision that John and I made in the car on the way to Palm Springs that first time when I met him, when we went to that rented house. And we talked about how if a 13-year-old sang a number in Act 1 that was important to the character later in the show, that character had that experience. But when you see an adult playing that character, you don't have the emotional experience of connecting it in a musical or a play, because it's a different human being standing in front of you, and somehow it doesn't work. And that turned out to be a very good decision. But sometimes you think you have good decisions and they turn out to be very bad decisions. And that's in part why this process takes so long, because you hope that you're making more good decisions than bad ones, but occasionally you're writing songs that don't work, or scenes that just aren't the right thing, or we've put the wrong energy here, or what have you. And that's part of the whole process of making a musical. A musical is like a novel. It took Jeffrey Eugenides 9 years to write Middlesex. I don't know if anybody read that book, but I love that book, and it was set in my hometown. And it's an extraordinary novel, but these things are like novels. They take years because we have to see them and we have to then talk about them, and musicals are often talked into existence. And so it's a big process of constant input and discussion, and then the artists going back to rethinking it.
Well, I think classic things that didn't work, as we discovered in Chicago, was so much of the time the musical had been me and Andrew at a piano, or like people were in readings or in workshops, everyone was as close as this front row is. And so in that really intimate space, some things worked that didn't work 50 feet away in the darkness. And on the stage in the darkness in Chicago, we would see these scenes we'd loved for 9 years. It's like, oh my God, that doesn't work at all. Like, what were we thinking? That's crazy. No, that's not a good idea at all. And the luxury of being able to go out of town and do that and see it with an audience, it was like being able to conduct an experiment every night. We were talking about that opening number, and we knew in Chicago we weren't going to be able to put it in a new opening number, but like, well, what if the whole company were in that number? What would that feel like? And that chance to explore was amazing.
Going along with that, Stro, what was more difficult for you, or were they equal, to create the fantastic tales, and then also to create the real dramatic, realistic truth between these characters?
I think the more important part was the truthful characters and the truthful scenes, and making sure that arc was strong all the way through with the three actors. And that was always the most important part. The fantasy scenes, though, they couldn't just be fantastical scenes and not have weight to them and not be connected to the principles. So the idea of putting the very young Will into a lot of the fantasies we found in Chicago, and that all of a sudden grounded these fantasies that had just been Edward Bloom's fantasies, but now to put the son in watching them as a young boy really grounded it, and that's something we found out of town. But I think, both sides were quite challenging to conquer, because in the end you always have to push the plot forward, and in the end you always have to tell the story. So you can't just go off and do a number that doesn't make sense. Right. I think that's when you do see a musical and it's not working out. It's because it's not grounded within the storytelling.
And going along with the real truth, why do you think Bobby, your character is affecting the audiences so much. I mean, people leave really affected by you and your journey in this show, by Will's journey. What do you think is they're seeing in this character?
I mean, I think we all universally understand what it is to not understand our parent.
Right.
You know, oftentimes because of the generation gap and just the difference in experience between a parent and a child, they often speak different languages. And so I think that's relatable, but in the end, I think it's really great to see someone who's been so resistant for 2.5 hours finally understand the real gift that his father always lived. And it's heartbreaking that it happens at the last moment, but it's so wonderful that it does. And that reconciliation, that last minute reconciliation is something that moves me, and I think, and hopefully, you know, moves everyone else.
And it does. And Kate, you're a new mom.
Yeah.
How does that affect you doing the show?
Yeah, it does. I'm at this point where I am a new mom, and I'm also looking at my parents. So I feel like a parent-child often, you know. So I am, I think about those things every night. I think about how I'm raising my son, and will he grow up to be as wonderful as Bobby Steggert, who's my son on stage. You know, there are there are moments when we have our little wedding dance beforehand. I sort of project into you see it every night. Yeah. I sort of project into the future what it's going to be like to dance with my son at his wedding, you know, and things like that. So it does sort of explode my world to live in, you know, in this fantasy every night, which is, you know, which is rooted in my real relationship with my real son and my real husband. Yeah.
So beautiful.
It's huge.
I think we're ready for another song now.
Yeah.
Speaking of which.
So this is the moment where Edward Bloom in Act 1 stops by a circus, and you may recall Kate was talking about that she was auditioning for the circus in a number called Little Lamb from Alabama. He watches her in this number, and time freezes in this gloriously staged moment where everything goes into super slow motion except for Norbert and ultimately then Kate. And they sing this song together. And stepping in for Norbert Leo Butts is Andrew Lippa. I don't know why that was funny, people. Time stops when suddenly you see her. Time stops, and what you thought you knew changes, and life beyond this moment is better, bigger. Time stops, but still your heart is beating. Time stops, though you don't take a breath. She's there, and all you ever wanted is nearer, clearer. I used to think the world was small. Now I don't think that way at all. Time stops when dreams come true before you. Time stops when fantasy is real. I knew this moment was expected, but this good, who could?
That boy is staring and I feel a chill. I don't know why that boy is staring and the world is still, not tumbling by. There's no one talking, but I can hear 1,000 voices. What's going is trembling, but in this moment nothing scares me. What's going on?
I used to see what lies ahead.
I thought my life might be a
Now I just see this girl instead.
I'm bound for something more.
Time stops and troubles are abandoned. Time stops the minute she arrives. I've seen the future in this instant. Subversive, sublime. I live forever in this moment. If I could stop. Time.
That boy is staring and I feel a chill. I don't know why.
How about the pipes on Mr. Lippa?
I know, right?
Wow. We got some questions from you all. I'm going to start off with this one. It says, to Bruce or Dan or Susan, what do you look for when choosing a storyline or film to produce or direct?
I look for something that's is original and something that I feel like is going to move audiences. In that, it's a combination of something that's going to be commercial, but something that I would actually really want to go see that doesn't feel derivative. And I've tried in everything I do to hit those targets.
And you do hit those, by the way, for your work. My goodness. Bruce.
I look for very much the same as Dan, which is not a surprise or coincidence since we have done a lot of beautiful work together over the years. And then the one thing that I'll just add to that too, which goes along with that, is then a deep personal passion. I want to find something that is everything Dan said, but then also I'm now at a point where it's got to just move me to my core. And then if it does, I feel like I'm the right person to try and take it to an audience.
Thank God for these men. Can I say that? Stro.
I think it's exactly the same. I feel very fortunate to be able to tell different types of stories, something as profound and deep and emotional as Big Fish, and then something like the Scottsboro Boys or something like Contact, or even the producers. They're all so different. And I think it's finding something that moves you, something that somehow you connect with. And because I'm offered many things that I don't connect with, and so I know that I won't be able to make it the best for the audience. But so it's wanting to be a storyteller, but wanting to be a storyteller that I know that I can somehow connect with an audience.
Next question. Kate and Bobby, can you tell us more about working together in Giant versus Big Fish?
Yeah, it was a very different. We played mother and son in a show at the Public last fall called Giant, and it was a very different relationship. We played very different characters, even though we played mother and son. In that version, I was sort of defending my son, protecting him from a father who was mean to him, right? Yeah. And we sort of had less to do. We had less stage time together in that show. We have more stage time here, and we are, I feel like, in this show, I'm the peacemaker. I'm trying to bring you closer to your dad, not to protect you from him.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, the gift of it, just for us as actors, though, is that we had such an ease with each other. It was because of the varied experience of two different shows, and and them being similar enough in relationships, other than what she said was different, is that we just fell right into a chemistry, and so it's just been pretty effortless. Yeah.
The schedules were so close between the two shows, there was a moment we were going to call our show Giant Big Fish.
And that was good.
See, not every joke, really is a good one.
But I'm going to lead right into a question for you, Andrew. How is your approach to the Addams Family score different from your approach to the Big Fish score?
I think how they're different is how they're similar, in that when any show that I want to write, I have to see myself in the characters, and I have to actually really see myself in the characters, because I can't write a convincing song for a character I don't see myself in. So there's something, I have a little more Tisha in me. In fact, I once dressed up as her and did well, you don't want to know that. But I do, I felt very connected to those characters, and that was the reason I said yes to that particular gig. This show, to be fair, this show speaks to me at a core level that is just far more primal and goes past thought. This show, the movie, when I saw the movie, it did this, and in working with John and talking about these characters and inhabiting these characters, John's right. I am Edward Bloom in the sense that I have this, this. I tell stories. I'm a little grand. I'm usually not as funny as I'd like to be, and I am grateful there are people in my life who put up with it and see what it is in me that's honest and real and beautiful, rather than all of the stuff that I sometimes put on top of it in my real life, the chaos that goes on. And so Edward Bloom's heart is something similar to my own. And when we got to the end of the show, writing the end of the show, John suggested we do this very method actor type of writing experiment where we talked about our fathers. My father at the time was dying, and John's had died, and we talked about our relationship with our fathers, and we talked about what we wanted. The conversation, in fact, there was just a thing I got from, I read on the Huffington Post about the conversation, how so many Americans don't want to engage or haven't engaged in the conversation about their own death, and facing death in a positive way, in a way that says, look, it's going to happen. I'd like to be involved in it. It's like grocery shopping. And in the sense that it's going to happen, I'm going to pick which store I go to. And I'm going to die, so I'd like to imagine as a writer and as a person what that might be like. And we got the opportunity to do that here. So we sat with Edward Bloom, and he was the third person in the room. And so the answer to that question is that's a lot deeper than a musical comedy, where I'm writing characters I like a great deal and see myself in, but don't have that kind of a deep connection to.
And you do both of them so beautifully. Amazing. Ms. Stroman, can you talk about the mechanics of the elephants?
Well, the elephants came about just, we had a circus, and that was trying to find magical moments, because we wanted to find in the whole show moments of magic, of the Edwards romantic and sort of just bigger than life ideas. And so when we got to the circus, I just wanted something more than just a unicyclist and a juggler. So, although they're very good in the show. So the idea of having 3 elephants on stage, but not really 3 elephants, 3 elephant butts on stage. And they get to dance. So the elephants, one of our elephants is here, Leah, right there, fantastic elephant. They're huge puppets, and they're swaying back and forth as if they are real elephants, but then the music strikes up and they do a little soft shoe. Yeah. Wow, with Edward Bloom. And but it's moments like that I think people remember in the show, like the mermaid and the fire dancer, or the elephants, or they're really extraordinary, fantastical moments that I think help lift the show to another place.
I have another question here. Can the creative team discuss the specific process of deciding when to use a moment/character from the movie versus the book, and when to create a new arc?
Sure. to me, it was crucial that it never felt like we were adapting the movie or adapting the book, but we were just building a brand new thing that had this great DNA. And so Dan had written this great book, which was Big Fish, and I felt like you could take Big Fish and plant it in new soil, and it would grow into what it wanted to be. And so the movie version of Big Fish was how Big Fish should be told as a movie. This needed to be told for the stage, and every decision had to be, what is the right thing to happen on stage with Big Fish? And so at no point did I open up the script and like copy and paste anything. At no point did I look at the movie until after Chicago. So for 10 years I didn't watch the movie because I didn't want to make decisions based on what I decided before. It had to be what was right for this version that we were doing here, what needed to happen next in this version here. And then we had an abundance of things we could choose from. So things like the town of Spectre, which was sort of an invention for the movie, this sort of Norman Rockwell fantasy town. It was a great movie idea. It's just not really a stage idea because you couldn't show two different small towns in the same 20 feet of stage space. It wouldn't make sense. So that needed to go away. And when that went away, well, then how do you get Jenny Hill into it? And so all these changes sort of rippled through to sort of get you down to the core ideas that you needed to have for it still to be Big Fish.
Is there ever anything like really special that you love that you just had to let go of, and is that hard to do?
It was surprisingly easy, and as we lost songs or scenes or moments or characters sort of along the way, two examples. Josephine is always French. Josephine's always been French. She's always been French, like literally from the first time I was flipping through Daniel's book. I was like, Will has a French wife. I don't know where she came from, but she has a French wife. Like I knew that was a thing I added, and I knew it was going to be that way. And so in Chicago, Crystal Joy Brown's character was French. And it didn't fundamentally work. And it didn't work quite on that conception there, but I also knew I wanted Josephine to do a lot more, and that her being French was putting a distance between us as an audience and her as a character. It made it hard for me to put more words in her mouth, and so she had to not be French. And so I had to let go of that. And that was hard, because Josephine's always been French to me. But now she's not, and it's so much better. And that's one of those things like, well, of course that should go away. But you don't see that until you experiment with it. Right. And so as we've cut stuff, I've never really missed it. It's like a fond friend from camp, but like you're back to your other life now.
And sadly, she was actually in France when we had to give her the news that she was no longer French. Yeah. So I think there were some tax write-off issues with that decision. It was no longer a research trip.
Yeah.
Dan, was there anything that you missed that was in your book that might not have been in, or something that you wish you had written that was in them?
Well, yeah, both things. Oh, yeah, there are a lot of things that John brought to the story, which I wish I had thought of. Is interesting, the circus scene in the movie, where you have Mr. Soggy Bottoms. It's Mr. Soggy Bottoms.
Mr. Soggy Bottoms.
Right, Mr. Soggy Bottoms, the lawyer and the clown, and he is going to shoot the werewolf, and so there's this wonderful scene with this dog, and it's also, and that's adapted again differently for the musical. But in the book, there's this scene where that John adapts from, which is there's this little town where there's a dog who, when you try to leave town, he'll bite your fingers off. So everybody has these, just half a hand or something, and you can tell how many times you've tried to leave. And I thought when John started writing it, I thought, what a great scene this is going to make in the movie. This is going to be such a great scene, and then it didn't make it in, and I was a little sad. But I liked what he did with it instead. And you see that in the book, the movie, and the musical. The DNA, as John was saying, it's like this. It is. You took some DNA, took it to the lab, and started growing all these different things, but they all also have this interesting relationship.
I have a question. How often does it happen that there's a book and a movie and a musical? Has it happened very often?
You know what? I was thinking about that in this order, in the book, movie, musical order. The only one, and y'all probably know better than I do, but the only other time I think that's happened is Light in the Piazza. And it's by Elizabeth Spencer. She wrote the book. It was a movie, and it was a musical. She lives 2 miles away from me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ragtime's another good example of that.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
Il Doctoro, then a movie by, I don't know who made the movie, but then the musical came.
And
Milos Forman.
Giant. There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Edna
And there's a
Ferber.
Dr. Zhivago musical out there, so that would be from book to movie.
There you go.
to
Yeah.
musical.
A
This
trend.
This is, for me, Big Fish is about the power and beauty of storytelling. How much did you try to incorporate that theme into each version of this story? And he also says, Peter Charnig has asked this question. He says, thank you for telling this story.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I think the power of storytelling is certainly Edward Bloom's gift. And so without Edward Bloom's stories, there would be nothing to do. One of the challenges we face, though, is in a musical, those stories need to be songs. So he tells fewer stories, fewer words of stories in this version than he did in the movie. But that's just natural based on how we're doing it. To me, thematically, the piece is ultimately about fatherhood and mortality. So fatherhood, a sense of being a father, becoming a father, what it's like to have a father, and mortality, which is what Andrew said, is like how do you face the end of your life, and how do you live on after you pass away? And ultimately, the journey that the characters go through is those paths cross at the very end. You realize that fatherhood is sort of how you achieve immortality, is you pass along yourself and your stories through your kids.
We talked a little bit about Chicago, and this question is, what changes did you make from the Chicago production? Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to be out of town and the fact that some shows don't get to go out of town and what that means for you?
Well, I think it's great to have the opportunity to go out of town. I know our producers really, it was important for them, and they knew it, and it's just so helpful. Because, as I said, the last part of the process is adding the audience, and you hear that feedback from the audience. So it's a lot. It's very expensive, though, to go out of town. I think it's like an extra $2 million to go out of town. So a lot of musicals don't get that opportunity any longer. Yeah. And I think it's very important, especially with a comedy, you should go out of town, because just the tilt of a head could get a laugh that you don't know until you add that audience. But it's something we always want to do and don't get to do all the time.
I have one last question here, which is a great one. We'll go through quickly, starting with you, Dan, and work around. Yeah. What are you all going to do next? What's happening next for you, Dan?
Well, I'm always writing something. I teach at the University of North Carolina and direct the creative writing program there, so I'm really busy doing that now. And Christmas break is coming up soon, and I get to break the same as the kids, so I'll be working on another book. And,
Ooh.
And there's one that had just come out fairly recently called The Kings and Queens of Rome, and it is going to be the Kindle deal of the day on December 9th. So
Nice.
that's December 9th, the Kindle deal of the day. I'd never even heard of such a thing, but it's apparently it's going to be at $2.99. Should I have just
Go
done
for
that?
it.
Absolutely.
Go for it.
Stop.
Absolutely.
Is that an awful thing to do?
No.
No.
Dan.
Well, on December 9th, I'm going to Kindle for. I spent a lot of the last 2 years really focusing on Big Fish, and now I'm focusing on my movie business and my TV business, and I have a bunch of things in development, and I don't know what will be next.
Oh, will we wait for that? Bruce.
Not sure exactly what next either, but certainly one that I'm excited about is Matthew Quick, who wrote the novel Silver Linings Playbook, which I was one of the producers on last year. He has a new novel coming out in the spring called The Good Luck of Right Now, and I'm working on the movie version of that.
Ooh, can't wait for that. Mr. Lippa.
I was commissioned by the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus to write a piece called I Am Harvey Milk that premiered in June. The recording came out a few weeks ago and went to #2 on the iTunes classical chart. And I play Harvey Milk in that production, and we're doing it at Avery Fisher Hall on June 23rd at Lincoln Center. So hope you can all come to that. And it just so happens that Bruce Cohen is our producer. So that's a wonderful thing in our lives at the moment that we're working on.
John.
I am back in the movie business. I'm writing myself a feature to direct, hopefully this next year. That's most of my next year is working on that.
Oh, exciting. Yeah. Fabulous. Ms. Stroman.
Well, we're going to be making an album of Big Fish in about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then hopefully prepping for a national tour, some version of a tour of Big Fish. But then in January, I start rehearsals for Bullets Over Broadway. So that'll open in March.
Bobby.
I'm lucky enough to do a new play on Broadway opposite Tyne Daly called Mothers and Sons by Terrence McNally. And that'll open this March, very soon.
Kate.
I'm going to put together a solo show to do at 54 Below in May.
Well, I can't tell you what an honor it has been to be with this incredible group of people and to see this show and to be with the process of the show. And I just want to tell all of you, I think a lot of you have seen the show, but it's running till December 29th at the Neil Simon Theater on 52nd Street. And if you haven't seen it, go see it. If you have seen it, buy it as a Christmas or Hanukkah gift for your family or friends. You must see the show. You must tell your friends to go see it. It's a very, very, very special piece. And we want to thank all of you tonight for being with us. It was really extraordinary. Thank you.
And thank you, Deb Monk.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Deb.
Deborah Monk.
Thank you all.